All right, mic check. 1, 2. Hello? Y'all here? Mic check. Mic check. All right, cool. Yeah, my headphones are not working. We had to restart a couple times, but we're just going to get into it. If I end up not being able to hear stuff that comes in or whatever, too bad, I guess. We're going to see what the problem is later. We'll just go ahead and get started. Let's see. Let me lower this. Okay. Ball Knowledge, Season 1, Episode 5. We're going to be discussing the conspiracy theory slash revisionist topic called colloquially as Tartaria. This episode's going to be a little different. I don't have a expertise of background and knowledge on Tartaria in the same way that I would on topics previously covered in the episodes otherwise, but you'll see as we get into it, it's a very new up and coming subject that's really starting to just now gain some mainstream attention and traction. If you're unfamiliar with it, we're going to go through some basics, and if you ask around, like talk to your friends, family, you'll probably know or come across someone in your circle who has heard of it, at least to some extent. So it's at pretty much that phase of the collective consciousness, but it's growing really quickly. So I wanted to cover this now and kind of set the foundation to be able to expand on it in the future. But yeah, you're gonna see that this is a quite a different one, and the way we approach it's gonna be a little different because it's very new. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot we're gonna have to call into question when dealing with this topic. So let's just get right into it. So at its surface, at its core, Tartaria really encapsulates a paradigm. This paradigm or worldview basically encompasses an alternative world history, so a different narrative of historical events, contrary to the mainstream. One of these revisionist or alternative theories or ideas is that a quote great reset took place, and whatever that entails. Some people will say it was a cataclysm or an apocalypse or some type of back to the Stone Age nuclear winter type of event. That's some of the theories. Some people come on and they go, oh, it was some sort of like transferal or people were translated somewhere else. And it's like all this. Imagine like all your Hollywood sci-fi like bullshit being said. If there's a theory like this, it's somebody's injected it into this. There's reasonable ones, there's crazy ones, it's all over the place. But the core idea or the core premise is they basically say we are the civilization after the civilization. If you're familiar with Halo, for example, they basically go, we are the descendants of the Forerunners. Things like this is basically the lore behind it. And then on top of that, you have these falsified histories. So they don't just have, it's not just a paradigm of a revised history, it's also claiming that things in the mainstream history are falsified history specifically. And many times you'll see with your popular creators today, they place an emphasis on the histories of architecture, city planning, grid layouts, and the tech tree of progression for technological advancement, which is, of course, the Anglo-Darwinian structure. Monkey to man, like retard to gnosis, you know? So they'll say that's bullshit, and we're going to get into all this and a lot more. So yeah, we're just going to lay the paradigm out. We're going to say, here's what people say. We're going to say, we're just giving an overall blueprint. So this is going to be a more technical episode and a more grounded episode. If anything, we're going to get more questions than answers looking into this. So right off the bat, really, right off the rip, I'm going to say that those who are looking into the history of architecture are very well positioned. It's very much a problem. People don't like to talk about these problems. These historians, these academics, they don't like to talk about this. But what we have are wonders of the world spanning the Western world in the architectural sense. Yet, when you turn to the evidence and the preserved remains of the field, the subject of architecture, well, we have one book. Um, so generations for thousands of years have, as far as we know, only had access to one book about how to be an architect or how to be a employed in architecture in that field. So this book is dated today to BC 27. It's called On Architecture, or the Latin De Architectura, by Vitruvius. And if you go on the wiki page, even they'll tell you they're not really sure his full name. They've reconstructed it from a few inscriptions to Marcus Vitruvius Pollio or Polio, and they date his life from around BC 80 to 15. But this single book was apparently, this is the story we're given, lost for millennia. Over 1,000 years, nobody had heard of it, known of it, or read it. And it was only, quote, rediscovered in AD 1414 by this humanist Italian named Poggio Bracciolini. So when you run this official story through, we have one book about architecture. And these are the basics, the bare bones. What does it take to even become an architect, more or less? And what all entails with being one. One book, and no one has heard of it or known of it. It's written BC 27, yet from BC 27 to the 1400s, no one's heard of it. Nothing we have is citing it or citing awareness of it, naming the author, none of that. And then in the 1400s, early 1400s, it's, quote, rediscovered. And from that point on, 1414 on, all of your intellectuals of the West run crazy with it, go crazy with it. You get the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci, and so on and so forth. All these big names, 14 to 1500s, make great use of it. But as far as going back prior, nobody's known of this book. No one's heard of it. It's arguable. You could even argue that Bracciolini or someone he knew wrote the book himself, because there's no evidence that anyone knew of it prior to its, quote, rediscovery. So this encompasses the whole of literature for Western architecture. And if you've ever been to Europe, if you've ever taken a trip outside of America, if you're from America, but in general, in the West in general, you look at these wonders of the world, many of these places we don't even have the contemporary architectural means to replicate, to recreate. So we have a big problem here. I mean, imagine you decide, oh, I want to be an architect. I want to go to architecture school. Okay,
Mom
well...
just tipped $2. Text from Mom. No, Albert, you cannot bring Dad's R-15 and incendiary rounds to the synagogue tomorrow.
Alright. So... Where was I? The problem is, if I'm going to go to architecture school, right? And I want to take classes, I want to learn architecture, well, you're going to have to study geometry, you're going to have to learn proportion, symmetry, and become a master of construction and engineering, really, for buildings. Well, how do you do that without a book and without any books? Well, as far as we know, they didn't have any books and there were no books. So that's a big problem as far as being able to identify a traceable way we came to build all these things today and had the knowledge preserved to build all these things today. So anyway, moving on. Why this topic again? To kind of bring it to the forefront. Sure, we can name the enemies all day. We can be like, oh, the Jews, oh, the Freemasons, oh, the Muslims, Islam, Iran, or Israel, or whatever, what have you. We can sit here and talk politics. It's all jester and noise, because it's one thing to just name people or name something and blame, so on and so forth. It's another thing to actually seek to understand what's going on and what whoever it is you're blaming or placing to be in that seat or crux of power. It's another thing to understand their operating methods, their modus operandi. Okay, people talk, a lot of people talk, but it's another thing to actually understand. There's a difference. So with something like this, it entails topics, many topics that relate to what these elite classes in society are up to and have a hand in. So I believe it's important to separate fact from fiction, what's real versus bullshit when it comes to stuff like this, especially when talking about architecture. Because as you know, or as you should know by now, if you've watched previous episodes, we've dealt in brief with the Freemasons before, but they do actually hold a lot of power. They do actually and fully deal with, in their jobs as a career model, with architecture chiefly.
Mom just tipped $2. Text from Mom. Stop pleasuring yourself with the dogs. They don't like it.
All right, that's crazy. This is crazy. So, what I've seen is with okay, that's crazy. That's crazy. Thank you for the 2. I appreciate it. But like, dude, you're giving money to say that. That's crazy. Anyway, these big platforms on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, like especially these shorts, if you get into these shorts, they have yet to bring anything coherent to the table. They really just present insane things like the thing I just showed or something that you can quickly mouth off like that, but then they don't actually make a coherent picture. And with that, many of them will try and psyop the viewer into believing something fantastic or something absurd. So I like this term psyop that we use today. It's actually very ingenious how it's coined. It really just takes psyche, which is Greek for your soul, and op, short for operation. So it's really, I have the breakdown here, but I mean, we've done enough of these already, so I'm not going to walk you through it again. But basically, when you invoke the psyop, or you say, oh, that's a psyop, it means an operation having to do with or that is oriented toward the soul. So that's what we mean really when we say that. That's the accurate rendering for it. So the real aim here, and like I said, this is a much more technical episode. We're going to be getting into some specifics about history, about chronology, and about the way we understand our current mainstream paradigm. But the real goal, real basis here is to give a suitable epistemology, which really just means a justification or a basis for what we are doing, what we think, what we believe. So you can sum up epistemology in short by basically asking the question, how do we know what we know? Someone says, oh, dude, I just insert retarded or ridiculous claim here. And then you go, oh, yeah, how do you know that? That would be, in another way, you're saying, give me an epistemology or an epistemic basis for that, right? So the starting questions are like, especially if you're new to this, if you've never heard Tartaria before, you're wondering, what is Tartaria or these Tartaria people? Why should I care? And what are they saying? What are they talking about? And we're really just going to, before even trying to answer that, we're going to try and approach this properly. So, we're going to start with the word Tartaria itself, okay? Because this is a proper noun. This is a name. We're naming something. What are we naming? So Tartaria is a very misleading, and it's actually an insult. It's an insulting name or term with how it's being used and thrown around today. And really for a few hundred years now. Throughout the West, it's been used propagandistically, and we're going to get into how that is. I'm going to show you how that is. It's a propaganda term, and it comes from the Greek word tartaros or tartaros. That's all it is. It's an anglicized rendering of the Greek tartaros or tartaros. So here's the breakdown for that word. And when you translate it from Greek, you get abyss, deep underworld, a bottomless pit, and specifically when it's elaborated on a place of torture within the chambers of Hades for those wicked and damned souls. And your anglicized form, you get multiple variants or ways to render it. Anything from Tartarus, Tartary, Tartaria, Tartarian, Tartar, and there's more of these, etc., and so on. So let's look at some ancient old Greek sources. So interestingly, despite this being a common and well-known ancient Greek concept and term, it actually occurs only once throughout the entirety of all the books of the Greek Bible. So we'll start here and we'll kind of work our way on. So there's one verse in the whole Bible in the whole Greek Bible that has this word, and it's 2 Peter 2:4. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and you've got the Greek, this is the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman manuscript tradition, the full Greek there. I've transliterated it, so if you want to read the Greek, you can sound it out in the highlighted blue. And then I've gone ahead and translated it, and I've made a few corrections to what most English Bibles will render, will carry. So, first and foremost, we'll just read the verse, and what it's saying is, "For if God did not spare angelos or agelos, the angelon or agalon, angels," okay, so just right off the bat, that's in purple, Anglicization, because we don't translate the word angels here. We just transliterate it. And that's another topic this will be expounded on in episode 6. But for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but casting them into Tartarus and chained in darkness, reserved for crisis. And the verse goes on from there, but the point obviously here is to show where the word Tartarus occurs. And one thing I'll say off the rip is another point of interest. I'll just revisit this verse in full for episode 6. I'll just throw it in there. But typically, where the word crisis is, if you check the blue or the original Greek, the word crisis is there. I'm transliterating, I'm keeping the word crisis there because it still exists in our English language. We use it all the time. And it's very different than how most English Bibles handle it. And if you read this verse in your KJV or your other big editions, they'll put judgment or damnation or some other form of legalistic Latinate term that completely abandons the meaning of crisis, okay? Because crisis here, we obviously mean a psychological state. When you're in a state of crisis, this includes psychological feelings of whether it be anxiousness, impending worry, things like this. Crisis, okay? I'm in a crisis right now. That's the word here, not judgment or anything else. But again, we're going to revisit this in episode 6. Same thing with the footnote. I'm just going to blow past this. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't want to get too off topic. So we've looked at other sources. Here's a little excerpt from Apollodorus, and they're not sure when this Greek writer wrote. They guess between AD 1 to 200. You'll notice too, I put translated by myself in the previous slide. Here I have the translator. I'm trying to be precise with citations to give the viewer or whoever awareness of what exactly I'm pulling from. So I'm going to go and when I can include the translator of whatever the translation edition is that I'm pulling from, just for future notice, because this is a new thing I haven't done in previous episodes. But anyway, 100 to 200, Apollodorus cast into Tartarus, a gloomy place in Hades, as far distant from Earth as Earth is distant from the sky. So here we have the narrative being regurgitated of Tartarus being a place or a gloomy place, a lesser, lower, or darker place within the realm or the domain of Hades. So now we get to the real advent of, in Western history specifically, the usage that becomes apparent with Tartarians, the Tartar Empire, and so on. So it really can be, as far as I know, and as far as most sources I've looked at have all said, this is as far back as we can trace the culturally popularizing of the term. So here we have King Louis of France in the present danger of the Tartars. Either we shall push them back into the Tartarus whence they have come from, or they'll bring us all to heaven. They'll kill us all. So this, again, like I said in the beginning, is propaganda because he's casting this label from ancient Greek mythology that everyone who sees this decree in France at the time is going to know and understand. He's calling their enemies uh, people of this dark place in hell. So Hades, which is the overall domain this location Tartarus or Tartaros is in, Hades is what gets translated to hell in English language renderings of anything from the Bible to anything written in Greek. Hades is what we call in English hell. So Tartarus being a place in hell, he's basically saying the hell spawn, we shall push them back into hell where they've come from. I mean, literally, that's what he's saying here. And we're going to get into who he's talking about and what this even is about briefly, just for some context. But understand that these people are an Eastern people. Even today, you have a subset of Mongolian people inhabiting parts of Asia that still are identified as Tatars. This is not to be confused with Tartars, these are actually distinct. So it's this king of France that adds the letter R because you could refer to some of the people who the King of France was up against at this time, calling for his crusade, as Tatars at the time. But even this was a small subset of people. So it's completely inaccurate and it's demonstrably a propaganda tool. He's recasting the name for who he's deeming his enemies to be. And this is important, and you're going to see why here shortly. So, at the time of this king, during the 13th century, the Mongol Empire is going to give you what they refer to and call as Genghis Khan, okay? The Golden Horde, the uh what's the other name? I can't remember. But okay, Genghis Khan, like the Mongolian Empire. At the bottom right, you look at the wiki, they show a map, and the other weird thing is if you compare the maps for the Genghis Khan Mongolians, it's always a different map. Every map seems to give you a different border region. So I think it's really just guesswork. But the problem here, and we're going to get into the Byzantine aspect, is that the problem here is Mongols are attributed to have this whole map. France, when you go to the left, is said to be saying, oh, we have to go kill all these people, otherwise they're going to kill us all. Okay, that's the king of France, and then he's calling them Tartars. Yet these people, the Mongols, at this time are allied with who we are calling the Byzantines, or the Byzantine Empire. But this gets obscured, and you see the map on the left. What do they say? What? They've got Greece, modern Greece, and like a sliver of modern Turkey. That's the map that they're depicting the Byzantines to be, on the left, anyways, from that wiki page. But there's a conflation happening here. So the question becomes, who does the King of France mean when he's invoking, recasting the Tartaros, these Tartarian people? Is it the Mongols? Is it the Byzantines? Is it the Chinese? Is it the Russians? Turks? Who's he talking about? And it's I would say very uncertain. It's very ambiguous what's even going on at this time. But we're going to come to find as we continue that there's a lot that we actually are misled about when it comes to this stuff. And again, we're still just trying to make sense of the word Tartaria. And this is what, if you try to, you have to go through. So, again, this is a Western centric term, Tartarian, only used in the West to name and denote a people or nation or group of people and nations in the East. So, people in the East, whoever they are, that are intended with the name, don't actually use the name for themselves. That's the first thing we need to understand. Never used or identified by they themselves. Well, just like Tartaria, or just like Tartarian, the same thing has been done by the West for the Eastern Empire that we now call Byzantium. So now you see how it just completely becomes a complete mess of trying to make sense of even establishing a starting point, giving an epistemology for even naming who we're talking about. Because we're about to see that the Byzantines, okay, the Byzantine Empire, Well, after this empire's existence, the West today has just invented this name for them, just like we have for the Tartarians, Tartaria, and that the Byzantines never called themselves this either. So, in the midst of trying to decide who the Tartarians are, referring to today and the understanding of back then, we're now also wrestling with, well, their allies. If we go with the Mongols, let's say, which is the most popular trope, well, their allies were the Byzantines. Well, the Byzantines we give a false name to. We incorrectly named them as well. But they'll tell you, these scholars, these historians, they'll say, oh, well, the Byzantine just means the Romans when they ruled from the east. And again, it's just the paradigm begins with the name. What you call something lays the foundation for your understanding for something. Everything, proceeds from the name you assign to it. So the names we use are important. And let's look at Byzantine now. Let's make sense of both of these and then proceed from there. So used in the West for a nation and people of the East, all the same as we've covered for Tartaria. But again, never used or identified by the East with themselves. So both these labels, Byzantine and Tartarian, are Western pseudonyms or fake false names. So let's look at now how Byzantine came about, because this is completely demonstrable. No one denies this. The sleight of hand is traceable to a guy called Hieronymus Wolff. And there's a few renderings for him. There's apparently no grammar structure agreement at the 1500s, the Renaissance so-called period. They call him Hieronyme Wolffi in some places. They call him Jerome Wolff in some places. But either way, he invented the term Byzantine to replace, in its place, Roman. And the first instance we have of this is in 1557, where he titles his book Corpus Historiae Byzantinae, which just means Body of Byzantine History. Yet, this volume, when you sift through it, it's actually all of these Greek-Roman historical books and writers documenting the Roman Empire in their Greek vernacular, their Greek language. So he coins this term for them, and onward from here it just kind of proceeds. So he himself, Wolff or Wolfie, runs with this name switch and continues it. So in his next iteration of doing this, we see he makes a Latin translation of the Greek-Roman historian of the 1300s, Nikephoros Gregoras. And we'll see exactly what he did. So the original work, written by Nikephoros Gregoras himself, was called Romaici Historia, or Romaici Historia, Roman History. And in the translation, the title itself, he changes this to say Nicephori Gregorae, Roman, that is to say, Byzantine history in 11 books. And then that becomes your Renaissance humanist version everyone's going to use in the West during the philosopher humanistic era, when the literature goes crazy, the printing houses go crazy. This becomes the new version. And these historians today, they don't deny this, like I said. They all, and this is the paradox of all of it. So we're taking whole nations of people and falsely labeling them. Imagine someone came up and was like, oh, hi, I'm John. And then you go, oh, nice to meet you, John. What's up? Yeah, what's good? John goes over there to do his own thing. John leaves. Well, when he's gone, or let's say he passes, either or, now I start going around telling everyone, oh yeah, that was Bill. I mean, dude. Anyways, we have some modern historians we're going to look at, and like I said, they admit this. So here's from 1999. It says, Byzantine should be understood as the convenient label which it is, a shorthand for medieval Eastern Roman. I mean, you can look at the rest of this, but it's just like, that is a person from the, I forget, the FBA, which is like Britain's current historical society. The term Byzantine is a modern invention, making the empire the empire attached to it notoriously difficult to define. What we call the Byzantine Empire was really the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and its citizens were Romans. Only the scholars of the Western Enlightenment, preferring to find their roots in ancient Greece and classical Rome, denied the Eastern Empire the name Roman, branding it instead after Byzantium or Byzantium. So, and this is 2009, the historian Lars Brownworth. So, and I mean, we could go on and on. There's so many of these quotes. I'm just giving you guys a few. The majority of the Roman Empire's inhabitants spoke Greek, and we refer to them as Byzantine, but they called themselves Romans. And it's just like, dude, like, why do they still do it then? Is the question. Why is this still a thing? If everyone can agree that this is a bullshit name we just made up, why do we keep using it? That's my question. And that's where things are suspicious. What's being covered up, or what is the function of this error that's been traditionalized or canonized today? So, and again, we have another one. This is a Greek American historian. The Byzantines did not call themselves Byzantine, they consistently called themselves Romans. The West devised this term during the last 1,000 years to avoid using any Roman label in connection with the Eastern Empire and its people. This is from Antonios Caudeles. And final one I threw up here, and like I said, there's many more you can keep looking at, but I mean, again, this is consensus. It's not even argued with. Byzantine Empire was in no way separate from the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire did not evolve into some Byzantine Empire, so on and so forth. And then he ends this introductory note with, I have no wish to further the myths of earlier generations of Western European supremacists. And good on him. You know, this is the top current historian out of Iceland right now. And yeah, respect for that, because why would we keep this tradition up? Anyway, continuing, we have this quote that we've already looked at, and we're going to elaborate on this a little bit. So we have some maps here. Now we get into cartography, the cartographical evidence we have of the usage throughout the West for Tartary or Tartaria. And these are maps on a PowerPoint. I have all of these in high res, and I can't really take you through zoomed in views of them here on the slideshow, but these maps are very great as references to look into, because what is being depicted on a lot of these is pretty insane as far as the reaches and expanses of Tartary. So above what is Siberia, in the east you have the Ocean of Tartary, which really makes its way engulfing around the Americas and Siberia, the Eastern European, Russian territories, all the way down to Japan, Mongolia, China. That's considered enveloping the Tartarians in this map. This is a French map, dated to 1706. And there's so many of these. We're just throwing up some notable ones. You've got a whole bunch of Russia, Mongolia, large parts of China, India, down into Turkey, the whole Persian area, all Armenia, Georgia, all these Eastern European lands, all being included as Tartary or Tartaria. And once again, same thing here, just another map for demonstration, demonstrative purpose. These aren't translated. Okay, this would be new and exact totality of Asia tabulation, translated. Nova, the Latin title. And this is a very detailed one. You actually have on the right each nation depicted, his stereotypical depiction of what each person or resident in these nations would respectively look like and live like, with cultural descriptions of them. So this one's pretty useful for getting the elaboration from this propaganda as well. So yeah, these maps go way. We started in 1776, and you go down to the 1500s. It's just constantly. There's just maps after maps. So now that we get to this point and we see that this is a thing, a phenomenon in world history, it brings into question two subjects or two fields, and that is chronology and world history. And you have some quotes here that are worthy to keep in mind here because, as we're going to see, chronology, world history really do come into question upon the exploration of the topic. But as far as engaging with it, you can't let superstition and bullshit take you to hit the ground running, right? These are pretty normie quotes. I mean, I'm pretty sure you would. I mean, you read these in school if you're in America. I'm pretty sure. But this is an important one. This is from a Czech author, Czechoslovakian, who lived during the communist occupation of the Soviet Union. And he says this: the first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, culture, its history. Then have somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, and invent a new history. And before long, that nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. The world around it will forget even faster. And in this book, he's basically outlining what the communist regime is doing to his people and his nation of Czechoslovakia in real time. So, to start on chronology, this is a Greek compound word. You have chronos and logos. Kronos is the Greek god or deity of the Greek pantheon that represents time. And logos, of course, word, account, enumeration, description. And it's just a combining of these two words. So, worthy to note that Cronus, in the way we would say it, is very misunderstood. And just like Cronus, much of the paganism of the Greek pantheon in general. Yeah, we're gonna skim over that. So here we have St. Augustine. The good Christian must beware of mathematicians and those who impiously claim divine insight, especially those who tell you the truth, lest through consorting with demons they ensnare the deceived soul in a certain pact of association. So he's telling you to be cautious of mathematicians. Now, this includes people in astronomy, people in modern chronology, anything that involves meticulous calculatings for dogma, for doctrine, for conclusions that are dependent upon mathematics. And we're going to see now, I think we're going to see why the skepticism is warranted. So if you're a Catholic today, I think you have full, yeah, you go ahead, bro. Like, you're good in terms of believing in the absolute lack of error in our dating system and calendar system. And that's ultimately because the calendar that, as we know it, is created and derived by the Catholic Church, specifically by Pope Gregory the 13th in the year 1582 AD. And even saying the year 1582 AD is within this system that Pope Gregory the 13th created. This is called the Gregorian calendar. And within this calendar is how all things of our understanding in the world today are dated in linear time. So when we say, oh, so and so did this 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, this is assuming we are presupposing the veracity or the legitimacy of the papal Gregorian calendar, the Catholic Church's calendar. We're presupposing that this is functional, accurate, real, and true when we date something anywhere in time. So this is something most people don't think about, don't really grasp or get taught, but when you think about it, it's obviously, this is how it works. This is what it is. So here we have a quote from Dr. Anatoly Fomenko. Now, he's very controversial in the scholastic world, the academic world. Some people love him, some people hate him. but he is the chief mathematician of Moscow State University out of Russia. He's essentially the current modern day Isaac Newton of Russia right now living. And he's a major formulator for the modern Tartaria conspiracy theory by association. He didn't coin the term, he's not espousing all these YouTuber and social media theories, but he lays the groundwork for challenging the calendrical system, the Western papal calendar system of the Catholic Church, as well as, based on that, using chronology, the legitimacy of how we're dating historical events, how we understand time, and how we understand world history. That really is a big niche subject of Dr. Fomenko. Well, he says in this book of his here, and he's talking about the Gregorian calendar system we all use, the chronology embedded in it. He says this chronology was largely manufactured by Josephus Justus Scaliger in his Opus Novum de Emendatione Temporum in 1583 and his Thesaurus Temporum in 1606. And it represents a vast array of dates produced without any justification whatsoever, containing the repeating sequences of dates with shifts equal to multiples of the major Kabbalistic numbers 333 and 360. The Jesuit Dionysius Batavius completed this chronology in his De Doctrina Temporum, dated to first edition 1627 and second edition 1632. This is a translation from Russian by Michael Yagupov from 2017. So this is demonstrably true, and this is one of the opening statements in his book, and it's a very heavy fact when you can understand this and put this into place. It really calls into question how we understand time, chronology, and even down to what day is it really today. But it's not just this. You have many occurrences of, for example, like I'll add to this quote, the use of the Kabbalistic use of the number 76 in chronology, I would argue. And you have many examples of this. So obviously, America founded in 1776. Well, with that, the Greek Empire, ancient Greece, BC 776, ancient Egypt, the Golden Age, I think, is 1576. The Ottoman Empire becomes free 18. It's on and on. There's like a whole nother chart you can make throughout historical timeline epochs where major shifts in world empires all and have 76 at the ending digit in their calendrical placement. But anyway, we're just getting into this. Again, this is one of his opening statements. Now, what else do we have? So, again, this is introductory. We're not going to dive too big into anything specific or too niche. Foundational anti-papal calendrical sources. Really at the start, so really 1582, 83 onward, where can we find people rivaling or resisting this calendar system? Does anyone? Well, two of the foundational works we have here are by Sir Isaac Newton himself and by the Jesuit Jean Hardwin. So many people don't know this. This is Sir Isaac Newton's probably one of his most suppressed works. He wrote a book called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, and this was published at the end of his life in 1728. So this is a chief revisionist chronology work by Sir Isaac Newton, and then from Jean Hardwin, a chief librarian for the French king in France, he writes his Prolegomena. This was published in 1766, but this is many years after he died. Now, looking at Isaac Newton, we have a quote here. This is from the same book. He says, this is Isaac Newton, "The Greek antiquities are full of poetical fictions, because the Greeks wrote nothing in prose, before the conquest of Asia by Cyrus the Persian. Then Pherecydes, Skyrius, and Cadmus Milesius introduced the writing in prose." And he goes on from here, and this is very outline level we're looking at. But this is Sir Isaac Newton. He's got a whole book here about how we actually have to revise the chronological dating we have for essentially all kingdoms and civilizations in the plane of linear time. And Dr. Fomenko, too, mentions and works with the work of Isaac Newton, which, if you try and research this and look into this, you'll find, out of all figures, Isaac Newton, practically no one in the West has actually, mainly ever, unless it's to shit on him, actually engaged with, at an honest level, Isaac Newton's material. You have very little scholarly work even published about this book that he made. But Fomenko engages it quite thoroughly, and he says, same book we're quoting from Dr. Fomenko, Newton's main conclusions on chronology may be encapsulated as follows. He moves a part of the history of ancient Greece about 300 years forward in time closer to us. The history of ancient Egypt, at 3000 BC and onward, is moved in time by Newton and compressed into a period as short as 330 years, namely 946 BC to 617 BC. Newton also moves some fundamental dates of the, quote, ancient Egyptian history about 1800 years forward in time. So, I mean, this is very substantial. So when we think of Pharaoh Hatshepsut and Pharaoh Ramses and all these pharaohs and all this ancient history in the thousands BCs and the pyramids and all this stuff, Isaac Newton, did you know this? Isaac Newton said, nah, this is actually like in the hundreds BC. That's like 600 BC. Here, I'm going to show you how, and then I'm going to write a book on it. Like what? And yeah, I mean, 1800 years. He's bringing events and figures dated to 3000 BC to 900s BC and onward. This is the whole conclusion on ancient Greece and Egypt with Newton here in his book. And this is just the enumeration from Dr. Fomenko that we're getting now today. So, one thing that's very interesting is and I'm just showing you here when I make the claim that, barely any scholarship even acknowledges or engages Isaac Newton's book on chronology. Well, yeah, like when you wiki his page, you get one source that even engages it, and it's at the bottom. It's this last sentence at the bottom where it's like, Newton treats Greek mythology as fact. Like what? First off, that needs a source. Second off, that's important to tell us about Isaac Newton's book. And it's like, this is your whole wiki page. We're talking about Isaac Newton here. He's considered like a father of like science for the West. So like the fact that this is one page to read about in wiki entry, just so you understand how ridiculous this is, compare with his chief work, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, 135 unique or distinct sources, scholarly sources are referenced to tell you about his Principia. 135 sources are pulled on the wiki. You look back, it's one source to tell you he believes in some Greek gods in one sentence on the other page. So that just goes to show you the level of awareness and acknowledgement in the West today for the mainstream Newton compared to, like, I guess, what someone else decided should not be mainstream. And that's the other question. What even determines what gets more engagement than not? Why is his Principia so important? Absolute time and all these theories he came up with, still believed today. We accept that, but we don't even acknowledge the chronology revisions of the papal calendar. We don't even know he wrote it. But yeah, here's your source comparison. This is how Wiki treats both of them. One source, and it's like an Israeli article where this dude from Israel is just like, yeah, Newton's retarded and believes in Greek gods in like one sentence. Versus 135 scholarly sources to tell you about his Newton's Principia. That's the difference we're looking at here. Anyways, the other chief work, foundationally challenging the chronology, we have Jean Hardwin, a member of the Jesuit Society, a Latin priest, and the chief librarian of the College of Louis the Great from 1683 to 1729. Now, one of the major things he did was compile, if not the first, one of the first histories of all of the church councils of Christendom in the world. And this is titled the Conciliorum Collectio Regia Maxima. It's all the church councils documented, or compilation of documents they had at the time. And he's got a huge resume. He was a chief Jesuit academic at his time, professor of all these things, and numismatist or numismatist. I can't even say it. Numismatist. I don't know. I don't know coins or coinage like at all, so I don't deal with that stuff in general. But yeah, he was an expert on that. Like if someone dug up a coin, he was the dude who was like, "Oh, this is blah blah blah." But anyway, here's his opening to his Prolegomena. It is my intention, with the assistance of God, as long as he grants me life, to show that all writings which are commonly thought to be old are in fact, with certain exceptions to be presently named, supposititious, with the fabrication of an unprincipled crew of literary men. This is a translation edition by Edwin Johnson, being pulled here. And in another work which deals with the same thing, but on a slighter note, earlier book of his, he basically says that this group of men took up the task of composing ancient history as we now have it. He's accusing a lot of ancient authors and books' authorships to be forgeries, because none of it existed then when they wrote them. As well as their era and their workshop, we know it was Cicero, Pliny, Virgil, Horace. So he's got a whole nother thing he's dealing with where he thinks a lot of these ancient writers are all forgeries by people 100 or 200 years prior to him living. This is not the topic of today, but again, this all plays into his chronology arguments. He's arguing against the chronology as well. This is pretty notable what he says. He basically says for 1200 years, the worship of God and Christ existed throughout the nations. These forgers, or as he's so charging them as forgers, desired that there was no God, or desired people believe there was no God but nature. And he's just giving what he's accusing these fraudists' dogmas to be about. But anyway, this is your summary, your overview of how chronology comes to be in the 1580s through the Catholic Church by the papacy. This is now how we have our calendar, our calendrical system that we use pretty much offhand as if it's infallible today. Throughout its first revisionists, people starting to question it, because a huge factor in this Tartaria scheme or schemata is the questioning of the reliability of current chronology. And these are some other modern sources that, when we do get more into this, we will be pulling from. So to revisit this quote again that we brought up earlier, this is a crusading king of France dated to the 1200s. And this is really where we can trace the propagandizing of Tartaros or Tartaros against these Eastern Byzantines and Mongols. Or so we're told, as they say. But when we try and look into what's going on here and what actually happened, things kind of crumble. They kind of fall apart. It really doesn't make sense. So let's look at this. So that quote we just looked at was from 1241, but in 1204 you had this Western unified empire called the Latin Empire, led by your Western popes. The Latin Empire in 1204 conquered the Byzantine Empire, as we call it today. Really, they conquered the Roman Empire's capital, which was called Constantinople, in what's now called the Fourth Crusade, which was called by Pope Innocent III. So when we think of these crusades, we think of the crusaders, yeah, we imagine these like Western Catholics who are saying, oh, take Jerusalem, take, and you know, the sayings, the things they say, oh, it's against the Muslims or whatever have you. This was the Fourth Crusade. This was a war against what was literally called the Roman Empire, led by the Latin Empire. So one of these crusades was against the Christian capital of the world. So apparently Christians of the West, under the papacy, launch a crusade against the Christians of the East. This is absurd, but this is the story. When you actually look into it, this is the story being given that happens right before the invention and coining of the term Tartarians, Tartaros, or their enemies. And who are their enemies? The Romans, is what we actually see. So the Latin Crusaders established Western-ruled Kingdom of Jerusalem. And if you've ever seen, they made movies about this, like Kingdom of Heaven in 2005, films like that, all have to do with this Crusader rump state called the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But again, I mean, when you think Roman Empire, you think of Rome, Italy, Julius Caesar, and all these Western ideals and concepts, but this is really historically not showing continuity, and it's really not the case as we hit the Middle Ages. So to separate the Latin Western Empire from the Roman Empire, one of your big things, of course, and we've covered this earlier, this page is from a previous episode, we've got the papacy or the Pope, and we've covered where this word comes from, the Greek papas or papas, which means your father, your daddy, your dad, or your papa. And this is an anglicized form, so the same way we say papa, you just re-render the vowels, change the presentation of the word, you anglicize it, and Pope is just another rendering for it. So this is your papa, your daddy, your father. Now, why are we laying all this out? So we've established a few things here. First and foremost, chronology, absolutely. The dating system itself is questionable and should be questionable. And why is it questionable? Well, unless you're a Catholic, do you blindly trust the clerics of the church and the papacy? That's who created the calendar system. That's who created the reckoning of years and dates within the system. Why should they be more authoritative than the chief of Harvard University? And why should he? You see what I mean? This is epistemology. Anyway, again, so we want to tear down the psyop that is Tartaria ongoing. So if you try and look into Tartaria right now, you go on YouTube, you're going to find this Angloid Judeo-Freemason. His name's Aidan Mattis. And he wears the cross and walks around going, oh, I'm a Christian. But it's like, no, he's literally a Freemason. Okay, so this Freemason is the #1 result on YouTube. And what does he do? He just dismisses it. He's like, everybody who questions or talks about Tartaria, they're idiots. And he's obviously disingenuous. I mean, you can watch it, you'll see. But I already see the actors and the people who run these charades and cover-ups for this phenomena of a theory. They're already running their cover. They're already running their jobs to deplatform it, to make it seem like no one should take serious, as it's not even hitting the true mainstream yet. So I just want to come forward and lay this out because I'm going to do a whole spin-off going into chronology and these problems with world history we're looking at, because I do think it's important and it really connects a lot more dots in the sense of understanding what's being talked about, especially in modern terms and theories like Tartaria. But anyway, let's give some general breakdown of how Tartaria is treated. So when you try and wiki it, dude, the wiki's great. The wiki's great. So the first thing you'll see, it's a group of pseudo-historical conspiracy theories. So right off the rip, they're saying it's a pseudos, or a false, a fake history, and a conspiracy theory. Okay, now me personally, I don't like the term conspiracy theory because the same people who ran MK Ultra in the US government, okay, these 3-letter organizations, they have openly admitted to coining the term conspiracy theory, and it was like the 70s or 60s or whatever. They invented this word into the English language to cast as a label onto their opponents, to their enemies, in order to dethrone or delegitimize them. Now, I view these actors as being nefarious with their intentions and not based in actually seeking to help or improve or lift up others. So I don't like using and adapting their terms. I don't think they should dictate to me how I speak. But that's just me. Anyway, with conspiracy theory, including ideas of a hidden past and, quote, mud floods, which originated as, again, they got to use the term pseudo-scientific Russian nationalism. And what they're nodding to with Russian nationalism, of course, is Dr. Fomenko as a Russian nationalist or someone who lives in Russia, who likes Russia. They're just going to pin it all on him. But we just looked at Isaac Newton. Where's Isaac Newton here? Or is a Russian before 1728 talking about... Well, I guess, actually, no, it doesn't work because he's talking about time, chronology. Anyway. What do they say? Oh, they just give you the basics here. But then you look at the subdivisions or the subcategories within Tartaria, and then you look up new chronology or like revisioning chronology. And all they tell you is here's Fomenko's work, and it's also pseudo history. It's also fake. This is false. So before you're even told what it is, they just tell you, yeah, this is bullshit. They attribute the concept of revising chronology or challenging this system to the Russian, who was Dr. Fomenko's inspiration, Nikolai Morozov, and Gene Hardwin, who we covered a minute ago. But it's very notable that they omit Isaac Newton. No mention of Isaac Newton. And like we said when we looked at the wiki, apparently no one really covers or acknowledges this work of Isaac Newton. But this is really very introductory, as you see. This is what most people see in the clickbaity spaces of social media with these elaborate architectural buildings, massive, what look like electrical displays, and all kinds of technological reality that is in the dated 1800s, early 1900s, pre-industrial revolution that really shouldn't be existing at the time. So the fact that we have these photographs really sparks curiosity. And you have entire channels today, Tartarian channels, that thrive off of analyzing these photographic collections. And we're going to be doing some of that in episodes to come. But what I really want to do with this one is really just supply a baseline starting point. And I think that's what we've really done here. I think that's what we're doing here. So we have a position of understanding the jumbling up and confusing of our world history, particularly with Western Latin imperial history and Roman history. It's hard to even put in terms or identify what Roman history is, with the way that these Western writers, and from back then even through to today, they just kind of flip on a dime and decide what to call something. And when they call something something else, they create a category, and they can box certain things and events in this category separate from this one. And before you know it, they've architected a whole new system divorced from what really is there, or what really is in front of us, and what really happened. So we've looked at that, and we've looked at chronology, which your first revisionists, the silence on them is what's deafening. The fact that Isaac Newton, one of his entire chief works, was about problems with and redoing the calendrical and chronological system that we still use today. And bear in mind, he's doing this in the early 1700s. No one's heard about it. No one's talking about it. And what have you, all these other founding ones and onward, Gene Hardwin and the rest. They're doing serious work. These aren't fringe theories. These are serious intellectuals, experts in their field, expert mathematicians who have looked at this, and they're saying we've got a big problem, we've got a big issue. And barely anyone's talking about it. Not many people are discussing this in the Tartaria space, and they'll just kind of go on rambling about their private opinions, and it really just gives the whole thing a bad rap. So hopefully this was a good starting point. It's been 3 weeks since the last episode. In a few days, I'll have the next one out. We're going to be rolling now. This was a tricky one for me to decide how to go about doing the introduction on. It might feel a little underwhelming. It does to me, but not to worry. We're going to be back very soon with more, really building on this.